Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into a question that's both fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty unsettling. What makes a criminal? Is it something buried in their DNA, or is it something that happens to them along the way? We're going to unpack the science, bust some major myths, and try to get to the truth behind the criminal mind. So, this is it. This is the big one, isn't it? Are people born with a kind of criminal wiring, or are they shaped entirely by the world around them? It's that classic nature versus nurture debate. And as we're about to find out, the answer is way more complicated than a simple either or. All right, so let's jump right into the science. Where does the balance actually lie between our genes and our life experiences? This is pretty incredible. After decades of research looking at twins, looking at adoptees, scientists have landed on this kind of breakdown. It turns out our genetics, our nature, can account for a whopping 40 to 50% of antisocial behavior. I mean, that is a huge piece of the puzzle. But, and this is key, it also means our environment, our nurture, still holds a slight edge, shaping how those genetic tendencies might or might not play out. Okay, so if genetics are part of the story, what does that actually look like in the brain? To get our heads around that, we need to decode a word that gets thrown around a lot and is almost always misunderstood: psychopathy. Now, this is absolutely crucial to understand. Psychopathy isn't about being crazy or out of touch with reality, like we see in the movies. In fact, it's pretty much the opposite. It's a clinical disorder where a person can be incredibly rational, even calculating. The real issue, the core of it, is this profound emotional void, a fundamental inability to feel empathy or to truly connect with other people. And these are the core traits that researchers like Robert Hare have identified. And man, it is such a bizarre combination, right? On one hand, you have this surface-level charm, this huge sense of self-worth, but just scratch the surface, and underneath you find a total lack of empathy, a gift for manipulation, and incredibly shallow emotions. So you might be wondering, just how common is this? Well, estimates suggest that about 1% of the general U.S. population meets the criteria for psychopathy. Think about that for a second. That's roughly 1 in every 100 people you might meet. Okay, 1%. Got it. Now look at this. Inside the U.S. prison system, that number just explodes. It skyrockets to as high as 25%. Yeah, you heard that right. 1 in 4 inmates. It's a staggering statistic that really hammers home the powerful link between these traits and criminal behavior. You know, this brings up something that confuses a lot of people. We hear psychopath and sociopath all the time, and we kind of use them interchangeably. But from a clinical perspective, they point to two very different stories. So what's the difference? Well, it really boils down to that whole nature versus nurture thing again. Psychopathy is largely seen as biological. A difference in how the brain is wired, maybe. This leads to someone who's calm, calculating, and detached, often from a really young age. A sociopath, on the other hand, that's believed to be a product of their environment, shaped by trauma or a really chaotic upbringing, which often results in behavior that's more impulsive and more erratic. All right, now let's challenge a huge assumption. When you hear the word psychopath, what's the first image that comes to mind? Probably someone in a prison jumpsuit, right? Well, what if I told you they're just as likely to be wearing a business suit? Yeah, exactly. Not all psychopaths are locked up. Some of them are right there, in the boardroom. This is a concept that researchers Paul Babiak and Robert Hare call the corporate psychopath, an individual with all the same traits who, instead of ending up in prison, uses them to climb the corporate ladder. And when you think about it, it makes a weird kind of sense, doesn't it? I mean, traits like being ruthless, super charismatic, and a master manipulator, those can be powerful assets in super competitive corporate settings. They can act without a shred of remorse, leaving a trail of damaged careers and ethical disasters in their wake. Just think of the scandals at places like Enron or Theranos. Okay, let's switch gears and debunk another massive myth. We've talked about personality disorders, but what about serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia? How strong is the link there to violent crime? The answer might really surprise you. The data on this is stunningly clear. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services finds that only about 3 to 5% of violent acts can be attributed to someone with a serious mental illness. Just 3 to 5%. The overwhelming majority of violence is committed by people without these conditions. And here's the part that just flips the whole narrative on its head. The truth is, people with serious mental illnesses are far, far more likely to be the victims of violent crime than the ones committing it. That one fact alone should completely reframe how we talk about this, from one of fear to one of empathy and real support. And that brings us to our final and maybe the most challenging section. With everything we now know about biology and psychology, how in the world does our justice system even begin to tackle the question of responsibility? Well, here's the bottom line in the U.S. legal system. Psychopathy is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. While a diagnosis might influence things like sentencing, it is not a legal defense. The law maintains that even with their psychological makeup, these individuals still understand the difference between right and wrong and are held responsible for their actions. And so this leaves us with a really profound, lingering question. Our whole system of justice is built around ideas like remorse and rehabilitation, understanding the harm you've caused. But if a mind is fundamentally incapable of feeling empathy, can our concept of justice ever truly apply in the same way? It's a question that challenges the very foundation of how we think about crime and punishment.